Hey, what's going on, guys? Happy New Year. It is now 2024, and I'm going to go through the top fights I want the UFC to make in 2024. Some of these are more realistic than others. Most of them are fairly realistic, but these are some banger matchups. It was very hard for me to compile this list because I had a list of about 50 fights, and I narrowed it down. I have about 15 plus a couple honorable mentions, and I'm going to go through this list rather quickly. I don't want it to end up being an hour-long video, but starting off with the first honorable mention, that is Aljamain Sterling versus Petr Yan 3. I feel like this has some unfinished business. You have the original fight where Petr Yan's clearly winning. It's looking like Petr Yan's going to find the finish. He throws the illegal knee, he gets DQ'd. They rematch a year later or so. Controversial decision where some people thought Sterling won, some people thought Yan won. It all comes down to that first round. 2 through 5 was very clear. And I just feel like there's some unfinished business there. And I really want to see that matchup again. I know technically right now Petr Yan's matched up with Song Yadong, but this is a fight that could be made in 2024. And I know Aljamain Sterling's matched up with Calvin Kattar, but I think Aljo's going to lose to Calvin Kattar. So that's going to send Aljo back to 135. If he can't beat Calvin Kattar, he's not going to beat any more of the elite at 145. What is he going to start fighting unranked dudes? No, he's going to come back down to bantamweight, and I want to see that trilogy with Petr Yan. Moving on to my next honorable mention, and that is Benoit Saint Denis versus Paddy Pimblett. Joey, what kind of fight is that? Why would you make that matchup? I just think this will be a hilarious fight. I mean, Benoit Saint Denis would murder Paddy Pimblett. And to be honest, if you're not paying super close attention to the fighters and their skills, this is a reasonable matchup to make because Paddy Pimblett's a guy who's undefeated in the UFC, and he needs to step up in competition. He needs to step into the rankings. He just beat the dead carcass, the rotting carcass of Tony Ferguson, and guess who's hanging out in that 10 to 15 spot? Somewhere around that 10 to 15 spot in the lightweight rankings. Benoit Saint Denis. I know the UFC would never make this fight. I know this is kind of unrealistic. I would love to see this matchup. Benoit Saint Denis would utterly, absolutely murk Paddy Pimblett. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention, and that is Manel Kape versus KaraFrance. This is a fight that we've been teased with for a while now, and for whatever reason, it hasn't come to fruition. Kape has a fight against Matheus Nicolau in early January. I think it's the first fight card of the year. But I still want to see this matchup. And I know if Kape wins, he's probably going to get a title shot. I don't know. Depends on what happens with Albazi and Moreno. I still want to see that matchup. I think Kape's a very exciting fighter, has good striking. KaraFrance, excellent striking, super well-rounded, has power as well. Both guys have power in their hands. And I just think it would be a really interesting matchup. And plus you have that kind of angle of the beef between the two guys and kind of Manel Kape against City Kickboxing. And I just think it would be a very interesting matchup. It's been booked, I think, twice, or it's been booked once, and then we thought it was going to get booked the second time. It never got booked. I want to see that fight in 2024. Maybe if the UFC decides to give Albazi or Moreno a title shot and Kape needs one more fight, I say book him against KaraFrance. I would love to see that matchup. Moving on to my actual list, starting off with number 15, and that is Wayy Zhang versus Tatiana Suarez. I would love to see this fight for the women's strawweight title. You have Wayy Zhang, who looked incredible against Amanda Lemos. Fight before that, destroyed Carla Esparza to get her belt back. She's a 2-time champion. And you have Tatiana Suarez, who's 10-0, has looked very, very good, coming off the win over Jessica Andrade. And I know Andrade is showing up for a paycheck. And she has a fight against Amanda Lemos next. If she beats Amanda Lemos, I want to see her fighting Wayy Zhang for the strawweight title. It seems like Tatiana Suarez has been hyped up. I mean, since like 2019, people have been talking about Suarez as a future champion. We need to get her in a title fight. And then she was injured and out for a while. Now she's come back. She's fought at flyweight. She moved back down to strawweight. She's won some fights there. She has a big fight against a former title contender in Lemos next. I want to see that matchup. I love that fight. Waylee's been working on her wrestling. Suarez has excellent grappling and wrestling. I think that's a banger of a women's strawweight title fight. I know technically, we're probably getting Wayy Zhang versus Yan Xiaonan next, but if Waylee wins that fight and in the meantime Suarez wins her fight, I think that's a logical next booking for the women's strawweight title, and I think that'd be a banger matchup. Moving on to number 14, and that is Petr Yan versus Deiveson Figueiredo. I love this fight. Petr Yan is matched up with Song Yadong. I already mentioned that earlier when I talked about the Aljamain Sterling fight. I think Figgy called out Petr Yan, if I'm not mistaken. I would love to see this matchup. Figgy went out there, beat up Rob Font. Petr Yan, if he goes out there and beats Song Yadong to snap that 3-fight losing streak. But in reality, it's not your typical 3-fight losing streak. Ultra competitive, close fight against Aljamain Sterling. Robbery lost against Petr Yan, or not against Petr Yan, against Sean O'Malley. And then he clearly lost against Merab Dvalishvili. If he gets a win, gets back on the winning track against Song Yadong, book Figgy versus Yan. That's a banger of a matchup. I can't even think of a superlative to describe that fight. I desperately want that fight. That is one of the best non-title fights you can book. Former bantamweight champion versus former flyweight champion who came up to bantamweight and got a win against Rob Font. Book the fight. I absolutely love that matchup. Both guys are super well-rounded. Figgy's kind of towards the end of his career. I mean, when you're in your mid-30s, you're kind of just headed towards an inevitable decline. But right now, against Rob Font, I know Rob Font's up there in his late 30s and maybe on the decline himself. But Figgy looked incredible in that fight. And it's now or never for Figgy. If Yang gets a win against Song Yadong and then, they book them against each other, the winner of that fight is kind of right back into title contention in the bantamweight division, even though the bantamweight division is super stacked. If Figgy comes up, beats Font pretty soundly, and then beats Yan pretty soundly, who, if Yan's coming off a win against Rob Font, I think that's a matchup that could be kind of move Figgy towards the title picture, maybe even get him a title shot based on kind of his previous accolades at flyweight. Would absolutely love to see Petr Yan versus Figgy. Moving on to number 13, and this was very difficult to order, to be quite honest, because there's so many great fights, but that is Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker 2. I know people complain Dustin Poirier doesn't want to fight any of the up-and-comers, and this isn't really Dustin Poirier fighting an up-and-comer. I understand that, and I'm with you. I'm right there with you. This first matchup, I mean, back during the pandemic, this was such an incredible fight. If you haven't seen this fight, I implore you to go back and watch it. It was in June of 2020. This was one of the best fights I've ever seen. It's super underrated. And Dan Hooker, he always goes out there and performs. Dustin Poirier always goes out there and performs. They're both super exciting fighters. They're both, I don't want to say they're towards the tail end of their career, but it seemed like Dan Hooker was, but then he gets a win over Jalen Turner, toughs it out with a broken arm in that fight. And, Jalen Turner gasses out. And Dustin Poirier, I know he's coming off the KO loss against Justin Gaethje, but I don't care. One's coming off a loss, one's coming off a win. I think it's the best time to match them back up, and that would be a heater of a lightweight fight. I mean, that would be so exciting and so compelling. And they both evolved a little bit. I don't know really how much better Poirier has gotten. Maybe he's just kind of stagnated a little bit. It's really hard to kind of put your finger on it. But I think Dan Hooker, a lot of people thought he was done for. He goes out there against Jalen Turner, takes a lot of damage. He did injure his arm. He was booked for a fight. I forgot who he was supposed to book off the top of my head right now. But he was booked for a fight. And I think it wasn't against Jalen Turner. It was against Bobby Green. He pulled out of that matchup. I think now's the time. Book Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker 2. That would be a savage matchup. Moving on to number 12. And a lot of fighters on this list kind of repeat, but obviously it's a long year. They should fight 2, 3, maybe even 4 times, so they can repeat multiple times. But moving on to number 12, that is Sean O'Malley versus Petr Yan 2. This is a fight I feel needs to happen. It needs to happen. Petr Yan was brutally robbed. In my opinion, it was a 30-27. A cut in the third round does not mean you automatically win that round. And I know people play revisionist history with it and whatnot. You cannot convince me that Sean O'Malley won that fight in any capacity. So we need to run that back at some point. It's a robbery. It's a robbery. And Petr Yan's a former champ. The only true loss he has is against Merab. But since then, that robbery win gifted Sean O'Malley a title shot. Then he went and beat Aljamain Sterling. And I know there's kind of like a bunch of contenders at bantamweight right now. And meanwhile, they're giving an undeserved title shot to Marlon Chito Vera because he has a win over Sean O'Malley in the past, where O'Malley had his legs brutally chopped. Then he was shucked to the ground and flash KO'd with brutal ground and pound elbows. Then he was structured out of the cage with no serious injuries. But after that fight, there's a few options. You have Corey Sandhagen waiting in the wings. You have Merab waiting in the wings if he beats Henry Cejudo. If Merab loses to Cejudo, I don't want to see Cejudo get another shot. So if Petr Yan can get a win against Song Yadong, then maybe get another win, maybe against Figgy, I wouldn't mind seeing Sean O'Malley, Petr Yan rebooked. That was a banger fight. Even though it was a robbery, that was an amazing fight. It was a competitive fight. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a robbery. I would love to see it rebooked. Two of the best strikers in the division. I just need to see that fight again. It'll be a travesty if we don't ever see OMalley versus Jon too, especially how controversial that first matchup was. So I would love to see late November, December of 2024. I would love to see Petr Yan get another crack at the bantamweight title. And against Shaun O'Malley would be incredible. If Shaun O'Malley could beat Marlon Chito Vera, maybe O'Malley fights 3 times. I don't know. He's fighting in early March. So maybe he can fight in the summer and then fight Jan in the winter, or, maybe December or so, somewhere around there, November, December. Would love to see that matchup ran back. That's a super compelling matchup. Moving up on my list to number 11, and that is Charles Oliveira versus Benoit Saint-Denis. Need I say more? I mean, this is a heater matchup. Charles Oliveira, coming off that win against Beneil Dariush, looked incredible in that matchup. Everyone was counting him out. I know he has a loss to Islam Makhachev, but the only loss since 2017 when he lost to Paul Felder, the only loss that Oliveira has is against Islam Makhachev, who is the current lightweight champion. That's not a bad resume to have, and he just looks so good, and he's had so many finishes. He has 31 finishes in his pro MMA career. 34 wins, 31 finishes. That's incredible. And Benoit Saint-Denis has looked better than ever himself. I mean, Benoit Saint-Denis, I know he's coming off a win over Matt Favola, and I know maybe he doesn't deserve that big of a step up against kind of the number one contender in Charles Oliveira, but the way he's looked, the way Benoit Saint-Denis has looked in his past few fights, I want to give him a big test. I want to see him against a Justin Gaethje. I want to see him again. I'm tired of these guys squatting on their rankings. If it was up to me, I'd book him against Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje or Michael Chandler even. I know Michael Chandler's supposedly fighting Conor McGregor. We don't have confirmation on that yet. But I would love to, if Charles Oliveira is not getting the next title shot, I know there's rumors, Charles Oliveira, Armen Tsarukyan, but at some point, even if, let's say, Oliveira gets the next title shot, loses to Islam again, I would love to see him booked against Benoit Saint-Denis after that. Even if he fights Armen Tsarukyan, I know if he beats Armen, he's probably going to be getting the next title shot depending on what's going on with the division. But in the meantime, maybe Benoit Saint-Denis can get a fight, and then he can fight Charles Oliveira. Imagine that. Imagine Benoit Saint-Denis gets a step up in competition, wins his fight impressively. Oliveira either loses or beats Armen, and let's say something else is going on with the lightweight division at that time, then book him in like a number one contender fight. Would absolutely love that matchup. Benoit Saint-Denis, one of the most exciting fighters on the roster right now. Charles Oliveira, obviously, he's a legend of the sport at this point. He's a veteran of the sport, even though he's still particularly young, and he's never been in a boring fight. Would love to see those two guys matched up. Moving on to my number 10 matchup, and this is a matchup, if you watch the channel with any regularity, you know this is the fight I want to see. Colby Chaos Covington versus Ian Machado Gary. I am praying to the MMA gods for this fight. I know Ian Machado Gary's booked against Jeff Neal at UFC 298, but Colby's relatively inactive, so it's not like Colby's looking for a quick turnaround. If Ian Machado Gary beats Jeff Neal, I still think he needs 1 or 2 more fights before fighting for a title, depending on what the welterweight division looks like. And I would love to watch Ian Machado Gary beat the brakes off of Colby Covington. Colby, almost 36 years old, put on a shit-stained performance in his fight against Leon Edwards, where he got gifted a title shot after being 2-2 in his last 4 fights with 2 title shot losses, getting finished in one of them, sat in witness protection for a long time. I think this matchup makes perfect sense right now, and it makes, even more sense really after the Jeff Neal win, because Ian Machado Gary, we need to see his wrestling kind of test it. Colby's a guy that can be that next step up in competition, can really test Gary's wrestling and see how he would fare against the Leon Edwards, against a Shavkat Rakhmonov, against a Bilal Muhammad potentially in a future matchup. And to be honest, there's already that heat there. You got Colby Covington talking about the man's wife. Ian Machado Gary has expressed interest long before that about fighting Colby Covington. Would love to see that matchup. I really want this fight to get made in 2024. And I think if it does get made, let's say Colby sits out for a little bit, you have Ian Machado Gary beat Jeff Neal, obviously could lose that fight. I think Gary has much more of a chance to lose to Neal, who's a striker and a boxer who has power, rather than Colby, who really just has his wrestling and has kind of seemed like he's washed up at this point. But if he can get by Neal, I'd like to see his wrestling tested against Colby Covington. I think Ian Machado Gary would probably retire Colby, but the build-up would be fun, and it would be an interesting test for Gary in terms of his grappling and takedown defense that we really haven't seen yet, and it would be a mega fight. It could be a fight that could be put on UFC 300. It could be a fight that could be put on any big pay-per-view main card, because Ian Machado Gary is slowly creeping up with star power. He's not there yet, but he's getting there. And against Colby, who's like that very, very low tier draw, under 400,000 pay-per-view buys, I think that'd be a huge fight that UFC would love to put on. I hope that gets made in 2024. Moving on to number 9, and that is Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill for the light heavyweight title. This is a fight that has to get made. It has to get made. Alex Pereira is holding the belt that Jamal Hill never lost. And he beat Yuri Prochazka, who in a way was kind of the lineal champion, took it off of Glover Teixeira, and then got injured himself. Then Jamal Hill beat Glover to then get the belt, and then got injured his Achilles. You know, I know some people might be clamoring for Jamal Hill versus his brother too, but we've already seen that. We've already seen that play out. I don't want to see that again. I want to see Alex Pereira versus Jamal Hill for the light heavyweight title. I'm thinking that could be around UFC 300, to be honest. That should be the next fight for the light heavyweight division. And I think that's a banger matchup. Jamal Hill, excellent striker. Alex Pereira, we know how good his striking is. And Jamal Hill never lost his belt. And I think it'd be an interesting build-up, too, because Alex Pereira has a very interesting way of talking trash and trolling, and Jamal Hill's super sensitive and petty. So I think that could be a fun build-up to a fight. I know a lot of people are super interested in that kind of stuff. And stylistically, it's just a heater of a matchup. I mean, Jamal Hill says, I'm going to go out there with Alex Pereira and I'm going to strike with him. And Alex Pereira is one of the best strikers in the UFC, best kickboxers in the UFC. But also, just last year, Alex Pereira got flatlined by Israel Adesanya. So don't count out Jamal Hill on the feet. I know he said he's not going to be implementing the wrestling or the takedowns. I think he should mix it in because that's Alex Pereira's clear weakness. So stylistically, it's a great matchup. The build-up would be really fun. And, you know, it has a good storyline to it, considering Jamal Hill trying to reclaim a belt that he never lost against Alex Pereira, 2-division champion. So I think that fight should be next for the light heavyweight division. I love the matchup, and I think it'd be incredible because, you know, also you look at Jamal Hill, his weakness is leg kicks. Who has some of the best leg kicks in the UFC? It's Alex Pereira. So I would love to see that fight play out. I hope that is the fight that happens next in the light heavyweight division in terms of the title. And I think it's a must-make fight for 2024. Moving up on the list, this is going to be a controversial one at number 8, and that is Leon Edwards versus Balon Muhammad 2. I love this matchup. I think this is a highly underrated matchup. And I'm just tired of hearing everyone crap on it. I'm tired of hearing everyone say, oh, this can't main event a pay-per-view. Oh, it's not going to sell. Do you get a cut of the pay-per-view buys? No, you don't. Let me put it this way. Leon Edwards has improved leaps and bounds since 2020 when they fought originally. Balon Muhammad has improved leaps and bounds since 2020 when they originally fought. They are both on crazy unbeaten streaks. Balon Muhammad on a 10-fight unbeaten streak. Leon Edwards at this point, what's he on a 13-fight unbeaten streak? Because he was on a 10-fight. Then he beat Kamaru Usman. Then he beat Kamaru Usman again. Then he beat Colby Covington. So yeah, I think he's 13-fight unbeaten streak. You have two of the elite in the welterweight division on undeniable streaks. And they are finally going to collide in a rematch from a fight that we didn't get to see in 2020 because of an eye poke. This is a great matchup. And I love the way the stylistic clash of these two because Leon Edwards, excellent striker, super well-rounded, has good grappling as well. But the cardio seems to be a little bit of an issue. Balon Muhammad, super gritty wrestler who has evolving striking that's not that great, but unlimited cardio. Even coming off the couch against Gilbert Burns, had 5-round cardio. I think this is the matchup to make, and I think this is a great fight for the welterweight title. I need to see this matchup. I have no problem with it headlining a UFC pay-per-view. I know a lot of people disagree with that, but that's why it's number 8 on my list, because I think it's that good of a fight. I think it's that good of a stylistic matchup. And if you take any other division, and you have, any other division, and you have a guy who has a 10-fight unbeaten streak, another guy who has a 13-fight unbeaten streak, both beating top guys, and you match them up against each other, if they have great personalities, it's a good fight. But because they don't have great personalities, I don't want to see this fight. Leon Edwards doesn't have a fun personality. Balon doesn't have a fun personality. Go watch WWE if that's your thought process. Stop trying to turn the UFC and MMA into WWE. I don't want to say it. Leon Edwards, Balon Muhammad 2, banger fight for 2024. Moving up on my list to number 7, and I mean, every single fight on this list is so incredible. And that is Israel Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev. This is a fight that's kind of been in the news recently. I don't know if it's going to happen. But Israel Adesanya lost to Shaun, lost his middleweight title. Khamzat Chimaev made his middleweight debut. Well, not even his middleweight debut, but made his middleweight debut. Well, it was supposed to be against a top-ranked guy, but even that's not even true. So, had his most notable opponent at middleweight, let's put it that way, since I keep speaking the wrong way. Beats Kamaru Usman, gets virtually no credit for it, even though I do think it was a close fight, even though I do think Khamzat does deserve more credit for that win. Even though I do think you can arguably make it a draw. versus Israel Adesanya, former champion. I think this is the fight to make right now. I love this fight. I absolutely love this fight. And stylistically, I don't know if it gets any more compelling in terms of star power. For those of you worried about pay-per-view buys, even though you don't get a cut of the pay-per-view buys, Israel Adesanya, Khamzat Chimaev would be crazy in terms of the spectacle of it all. Because Khamzat Chimaev, the UFC's made a massive mistake with Khamzat. I mean, promotional malpractice with Khamzat Chimaev. They could have built Khamzat into this mega star. I still think they can, so maybe it's not that big of an issue. But it's just the inactivity of Khamzat, whether that's his fault or the UFC, they need to get this guy booked. And against a star like Israel Adesanya, a proven star, this is a huge fight for the middleweight division. It'd be a number one contender fight for the middleweight title. It can be put on UFC 300. And stylistically, it's an incredible matchup. Israel Adesanya, excellent footwork, excellent counter-striking. Khamzat Chimaev wants to go out there, ragdoll you, press forward, look for a takedown, look for submissions, but doesn't have a good gas tank. It'd be incredible. I don't think... this is one of like the top 3 biggest fights you could make in 2024. Khamzat Chimaev versus Israel Adesanya. Sign me up. Book it for UFC 300. Would love to see it. Winner goes to fight for the middleweight title. I think this could be one of the fights the UFC kind of wants to wait and have it play out for a middleweight title. So that's why I think they may not make this fight just yet. They're going to hope that either Adesanya reclaims his belt or Chimaev wins the belt. And then imagine imagine building that fight up. And that would be an incredible build-up as well. You got Adesanya, who's kind of weird and cringy and will talk trash. You got Chimaev, who's constantly talking trash to different fighters, even though he doesn't end up fighting them. The build-up would be fun. The spectacle would be fun. And stylistically, 2 of the elite. And the style clash between elite striker, elite kickboxer, counter-striker versus bulldozing wrestler, grappler, submission artist, and Khamzat Chimaev. That's one of the best fights you can make for 2024. Moving up on my list to number 6, and that is Shaun O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili. I know this isn't like the sexiest fight on the list, but Merab deserves this fight. He deserves the fight. He's fighting Henry Cejudo. I suspect he'll beat Henry Cejudo. I'm not super confident in that. But if he beats Henry Cejudo, we got to give Merab his title shot at that point. He's never turned down a title fight, contrary to popular belief. People just like to make claims even when they're not true. Shaun O'Malley's preemptively ducking Merab before he even won the belt. He's now fighting Marlon Chito Vera. If Shaun O'Malley beats Marlon Chito Vera, Merab beats Henry Cejudo, we need to book Shaun O'Malley versus Merab Dvalishvili. Stylistically, it's an incredible fight. I know the UFC likes to say Shaun O'Malley's some massive star. He's horrible on the mic. He had one good line against Sean Strickland, but that's about it, and that was kind of cringy itself. This is the fight to make. This is really the fight to make, and it's a very interesting style matchup because you have Merab, who's just endless takedown after takedown after takedown, relentless pressure. He's not going to be Aljo. He's not going to hang on the outside and have these he will have the sloppy entries, but it'll just be nonstop, one after the other, one after the other. If O'Malley, sheds off one, it's going to be just chain takedown after takedown after takedown after takedown. Then you have O'Malley, great footwork, excellent counter striker, good power. So even though I think O'Malley in the UFC were purposely avoiding Merab for O'Malley's first title defense, I think O'Malley could win that fight. It wouldn't shock me if O'Malley TKO'd Merab, but it also wouldn't shock me if Merab just grinded him out for 5 rounds or found a finish in the 3rd or 4th when O'Malley starts to get tired from all the grueling wrestling. I don't think he'll survive like Petr Yan. I think that is a matchup for the bantamweight title that has to be made in 2024. I think honestly the build-up would be interesting as well. I don't think Shaun O'Malley's a star yet, but let's say Shaun O'Malley goes out there, gets a highlight reel win over Chito, and then beats Merab. You don't have to be that great on the mic to build up a following when you continue to win. So Shaun O'Malley, if he keeps kind of etching that resume, we can say what we want about his previous fights. His only good wins, Aljamain Sterling. The Petr Yan win doesn't count in my book. So if he goes out there, beats Merab, is able to fend off the takedowns, or even just able to use his footwork and kind of his juke moves and the way he moves side to side, his lateral movement, and beat Merab and let's say snipes him from the outside, that'd be an incredible win. And it would kind of be one of those the wins where you could say, okay, we don't have to worry about O'Malley. He's fought plenty of wrestlers and he's been able to, elite level wrestlers, and he's come out the other side. I need to see that fight in 2024. Moving up my list to number 5. And that is Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. We don't need to see Jon Jones versus the dead body of Stipe Miocic, who's been answering phones at the fire department. I do not want to see that fight. Tom Aspinall looked incredible against Sergey Pavlovich, brutally KOs him in the first round. Jon Jones, considered the greatest of all time, submitted Cyril Gane in the first round. The only fight to make right now is Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall for the unification of the heavyweight titles. Why do we have an interim champion and we're not going to book him next against the undisputed champion, Stipe Miocic's been out. I mean, I know I've said this ad nauseum, but he's been out since March of 2021. Stipe hasn't fought since I've had this channel. March of 2021, damn near 3 years. By the time Stipe actually steps back in the cage, it's going to be well over 3 years. It's going to be creeping up on 3.5 years. And in his last fight, he got folded like a lawn chair. No one wants to see Jones versus Stipe. If you do, something's wrong with your brain. It is time for Jon Jones, Tom Aspen. Jon Jones, amazing fight IQ, super well-rounded. I mean, there's really no holes in his game. But you have Tom Aspinall, kind of like a new breed of heavyweight, super light on his feet, super athletic, nasty power, good wrestling, good submission ability, good striking, good boxing. That is the real test for Jon Jones right now. And I think that's a super compelling fight, and I think it'll be a mega pay-per-view. I think that's a fight where people would look at and be like, holy shit, Tom Aspinall can win this. He can be the guy to go out there and finish Johnny Bones Jones. It needs to get made. If I have to watch Jon Jones sit out with his championship belt until August or September or maybe even November of 2024 just to fight old man Stipe Miocic and then retire, I'm going to be sick to my stomach. So the UFC needs to book Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall next in the heavyweight division. Ultimately, will they? Probably not. But that's the fight that needs to get made. Moving up on my list to number 4, and that is Islam Makhachev versus Armen Tsarukyan 2 for the lightweight title. Armen looked incredible in his last fight, and I know he beat Beneil Dariush, who's kind of stuck in the mud, who's coming off a loss against Charles Oliveira. I need to see this fight. Islam Makhachev in his prime, in his early 30s. Armen Tsarukyan in his late 20s, in his prime arguably as well, looking better than ever. They fought with Armen coming in on short notice against Islam. It was a very close competitive fight. This is the fight to book for the lightweight division. I mean, I think this is the fight I want more than anything right now in terms of the lightweight division. I just think it's super compelling because they fought many years ago. But again, Armen was on short notice, and they've both gotten so much better since then. Islam striking, he's arguably the best striker in the UFC right now. Yeah, you heard that right. Arguably the best striker in the UFC right now. His wrestling is second to none. His jiu-jitsu is second to none. He has great cardio, has good defensive ability on the feet as well. He's not one of these great offensive strikers, but gets clipped a lot. I love this matchup. I want to see this matchup desperately. This is a great fight. Why not book that for the lightweight title at some point in 2024? I know maybe Armen's going to fight Charles Oliveira, but if he wins that, you're going to deny him at that point? No, he needs the title shot. You know, I know right now the way I think the lightweight division is going to play out, I think we're going to get Islam Makhachev versus Justin Gaethje in Saudi Arabia, main event. I've already done countless videos on that. If you want to go check those out on the channel. I believe Islam Makhachev wins that fight. So in the meantime, if they book Armen versus anyone else, whether it be Charles Oliveira or Dustin Poirier or whoever it may be, if Armen wins that fight, the only matchup to make for the October fight card, or maybe even the summer fight card, because Islam says he wants to fight 3 times this year, it should be Islam Makhachev versus Armen Tsarukyan. I love that fight. That's one of the most highly skilled matchups I can think of in the lightweight division. And even though they fought before, it feels like fresh blood. I feel like for the lightweight division, we've just been recycling contenders. You know, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, just kind of recycling the names over and over and over again. Islam Makhachev versus Armen Tsarukyan for the title is a fresh matchup. 2 guys in their prime, 2 guys who are very well-rounded and skilled and getting better. And, you know, I mean, just evolving from fight to fight. That is a matchup I need to see in 2024. Hopefully summer or fall of 2024 if everything plays out properly. Moving up on my list to number 3, and this is a fight that I've had, you know, kind of in my mind, been fantasizing, deeply fantasizing about this matchup between 2 grown men for probably 3 years now since they were unranked, both unranked. It doesn't really make sense. It's not super realistic, but I had to put it on a list. I struggled with this list because I wanted to make it realistic, but at the same time, there's just fights I need to see. And this was on my list last year as well, and that is Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Khamzat Chimaev. The hardcores know. The hardcores know. I mean, Shavkat Rakhmonov, 18-0. 18-0, nothing but finishes. Khamzat Chimaev, 13-0. Unbelievable. 11 finishes, 2 decisions. I know Khamzat went up to middleweight, but imagine this. And I don't know how this would exactly have to play out. And I know we don't necessarily like people fighting for a second belt when they haven't really defended. Imagine Shavkat, let's say, fights the winner of, let's say Leon Bilal happens at UFC 300 in April. Let's say, hypothetically, Bilal Muhammad wins, because that's my early prediction right now. Bilal Muhammad wins. Bilal Muhammad wants to stay active, and he wants to fight actual contenders, so he'll fight Shavkat in the summer of 2024. Imagine Belal versus Shavkat happens at the end of 2024. Shavkat wins the belt. In the meantime, when all that's happening, Khamzat fights the winner of Sean Strickland versus Dricus du Plessis, and let's say he wins the middleweight title. I don't care. I know I've been one to claim meritocracy. Throw everything out the window. I don't care. I don't give a shit. Book Shavkat Rakhmonov, who will now be the undisputed welterweight champion, against Khamzat Chimaev, undisputed middleweight champion. That is the fight I need to see. That's one of the best matchups that I've been thinking of for the last 2 to 3 years when they were both unranked and they were both in the welterweight division. I need to see that fight at some point in time. And it seems like when the hardcore fans get behind a certain matchup and really want to see it desperately, it just seems like it never comes to fruition. Just one off the top of my head, for years, everyone wanted George St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva. We never got that fight. People even wanted Anderson Silva, not as much as the GSP fight. Anderson Silva versus Jon Jones never happened. I need to see Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Khamzat Chimaev. Please, UFC, make it happen. I don't care. Maybe Khamzat loses a title fight, and maybe he goes down to welterweight. Maybe Shavkat loses to someone in the meantime. Book them then. I need to see them staring across from each other. For me, this could have been number 1 easily. It could have been number 1 easily. But ultimately, it ended up being number 3 because there's just so many great fights that I could make. I need to see this fight. Both have excellent grappling. Both, amazing finishing ability. Both good, relatively good striking. It's not like the elite of the elite, like a elite kickboxer like Alex Pereira. But that is a stylistic clash I would love to see. And, that could be a headliner or UFC 300 for all I care right now. Right now, you could have non-champion Shavkat Rakhmonov move up to middleweight to take on Khamzat Chimaev, who's non-champion at middleweight. I would pay $150 for that UFC 300 main event alone. That's how badly I want to see that fight. That's how bad I want to see, because you kind of have both these guys who've been labeled as like the boogeyman of each division, or even the welterweight division, really, when they were both down there. I need to see them fight each other at some point in their careers. They're hitting their prime right now. I hope, even if we don't see it in 2024, I hope we see it at some point over the next 2 to 3 years, maybe with a title on the line. I think that'd be super interesting. Maybe at some point Shavkat moves up. Khamzat is in a good position in the middleweight division and you book them then, but I just hope it comes to fruition. I don't care how it comes to fruition. Moving up on my list to number 2, and this is a fight that I think is very, very possible for 2024, and that is Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. And this could be for the middleweight title. This could not be for the middleweight title. If Dricus wins at UFC 297, they could give Israel Adesanya an automatic title shot. If Dricus loses, they could also book Adesanya versus Dricus. That would still be a big fight, and it would make more sense with Dricus coming off a loss to Strickland and Adesanya coming off a loss to Strickland. This is a fight we kind of got blue-balled with in 2023. It was supposed to happen. The UFC, the way they book certain fights, they wanted to have Dricus make a quick turnaround. Dricus was fighting for a title. He said, you know what? I'm not going to put such a big opportunity on the line with a short-notice fight with kind of some lingering injuries, so we didn't get it. We got Adesanya versus Strickland. And I remember making a video then. I said, I hate this fight. This could ruin the Dricus du Plessis Adesanya fight. And sure enough, as unlikely as it was, Strickland ruined the du Plessis Adesanya fight. It can still happen. If du Plessis wins at UFC 297, du Plessis is going to want the biggest fight for the division, and that's going to be Israel Adesanya, and that's a fight that he's been wanting for a while, and he can make a lot of pay-per-view revenue off of that. All you guys who get a cut of the UFC's pay-per-view revenue can be very happy about that. It'd be a very interesting build-up. You'd have people arguing about who's more African and who said they're the real African and whatnot. But for me, this fight got so much more compelling over the last 6 months. Because at one point in time, when I'm looking at Israel Adesanya coming off a win over Alex Pereira, and I'm looking at Dricus du Plessis coming off a win over Derek Brunson, where he lost the first round, or was losing the first round, didn't lose the first round, but was, Derek Brunson was winning early in that. I thought the fight was interesting, but I'm just thinking, okay, Israel Adesanya, easy KO. That's easy work for Israel Adesanya. It wasn't all that compelling. But then I see Dricus du Plessis go out there and bulldoze Robert Whittaker. Then I see Adesanya go out there and shit the bed against Sean Strickland. The fight got a lot more compelling in my eyes, because at one point in time, I'm thinking Adesanya's up here and Dricus du Plessis down here. Now I'm thinking, okay, the skill set is kind of weird. Like, I feel like Adesanya is more skilled, but du Plessis with his physicality and his just unwavering heart and durability, I need to see that fight. That's like the bull in the matador. Dricus du Plessis just rushing forward with his sloppy haymakers, looking to put Adesanya out. And Adesanya just using his footwork and lateral movement, side to side, looking to snipe Dricus du Plessis. And then you have all the bad blood of all the African bullshit behind it. And then on top of that, if Adesanya loses, and let's say He hasn't even won a fight in between the Strickland fight. That's the end of his middleweight title run, basically. So it's, it's a must win for Adesanya. I mean, that's the biggest fight. I think that's a huge fight they can make for UFC 300 if Du Plessis does win at 297. Regardless of what happens with Du Plessis and his title aspirations at 297, if he loses, I still want to see Du Plessis versus Adesanya. That's such a compelling stylistic clash, and I would love to see it play out. The Bull versus the Matador. Dricus is never in a boring fight. I think he's going to force Adesanya on the back foot. Adesanya's going to be trying to counter-strike, but Du Plessis, he just keeps moving forward, keeps looking to land big shots, and also has very good jiu-jitsu on the ground as well. I would love to see that matchup, and I hope it does happen for a middleweight title at some point in time. Even if, let's say, hypothetically, Dricus beats Strickland, they book Adesanya versus Khamzat Chimaev, which has been kind of rumored, but probably not going to happen in my opinion. And then Adesanya beats Chimaev. Imagine the hype behind that fight. Du Plessis coming off the destruction of Shaun Strickland. Adesanya coming off the destruction of Khamzat Chimaev. Boom, throw him in a middleweight title fight, summer of 2024. That's one of the biggest fights you can make in the UFC. Would absolutely love that matchup. Moving on to my number one fight I must see in 2024. The UFC must make this fight. I hate to say this. It's number one, but there's almost zero possibility of it happening. And I believe this was my number one from last year as well. And that is Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones. This is the one that got away, boys. This is the one that got away. I need to see this fight. I need to see it even more now. We wanted to see it before. I need to see it even more now because before we're thinking, okay, Francis Ngannou folded Stipe Miocic like a lawn chair, then beat Cyril Gane, and we kind of wanted to see the Jon Jones fight even before the Cyril Gane matchup. And then it didn't happen. Jon Jones is out negotiating with the UFC. Then Francis is out negotiating with the UFC, inevitably leaves the UFC, signs with PFL with the biggest heavyweight deal in MMA history, with the option to box. In the meantime, Jon Jones faces Cyril Gane for the vacant heavyweight title, makes quick work of Cyril Gane, submits him in the first round. Then Francis Ngannou goes out there and does the unthinkable and beats Tyson Fury. I know not on paper, but he beat Tyson Fury. Let's be real here. He beat Tyson Fury. This fight got a whole heck of a lot better and a whole heck of a lot bigger. I feel like the UFC, for the fans, they need to shell out the checkbook. They need to shell out the bags of cash and somehow make it happen. I don't care. I wish I was Bill Gates right now. If I was a billionaire right now, I'm calling Dana White. I'm calling the UFC. I'm like, look, I know Power Slap's doing good in India. I need to see Ngannou versus Jon Jones. How much do I have to offer up? I'll give you $100 million. I'll give you $100 million. I'll pay both their purses. You get to keep all the revenue from the pay-per-view. Just make this fight happen. That's how badly I want to see Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones. You have Francis Ngannou, a freak athlete who's better than ever, whose boxing has gotten better than ever, just outboxed the arguably best heavyweight boxer on the planet in pure boxing, who has wrestling ability, who out-wrestled Cyril Gane in his last fight. He's a freak athlete against Jon Jones, arguably the greatest fighter of all time, with an unbelievable fight IQ, who looked very good at heavyweight against Cyril Gane. Guys, that's the fight I want bad. That is the fight I want so bad. If you've been watching my channel with any regularity, you know how badly I want that fight. We need Francis Ngannou, Jon Jones. Super unlikely. The UFC doesn't care about Francis Ngannou anymore. They pretend he doesn't exist. They send Chael Sonnen, their kind of lackey, out there to do UFC anti-Francis Ngannou propaganda because they're so mad that Francis Ngannou decided to do what's best for him. And they had all the UFC shills and UFC sycophants on their side saying, oh, Francis fumbled the bag. And, I don't want to get into that too much. I have an entire playlist. I'll link that down in the description. If you want to see my entire Francis Ngannou playlist, my best take of 2023 about Francis Ngannou. But the UFC needs to realize, look, this fight's huge now. It's bigger than it ever could have been previously. We have to look, we have to just eat this loss a little bit. Let's pay Francis Ngannou good money. Let's pay him 20, 30 million plus pay-per-view points. Let's pay Jon Jones good as well. Let's kick the carcass of Stipe Miocic's fire department body off to the side. Okay, he can go answer the phone calls at the fire department some more. And let's book Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones. That is the fight that I need to see for 2024. And that's my list. That's my entire list. This is a super long video. I'm sorry about that, guys. Comment down below. What do you think of the list? And also, what are some fights that the UFC must make in 2024 as far as your preferences? Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.